Okay, hello everyone. Good morning to you. Good morning to one half of the world, and I guess it's a good evening to the other half. So, thank you everyone for making it over here today. And for this particular speaker session, we have Daniel and Brendan with us. So Daniel is the CTO of Akia, right? And he'll start first, followed by Brendan in a bit. So in this speaker series, he will share with all of you on how to take your hackathon to the next level, and and we are going to be at the submission deadline soon. So goodness, probably teams will need it. So okay, let me just move away from the stage. Daniel, please take it away.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, guys. Really happy to be here. I hope you find my presentation useful and not too boring.
Hey,
So for
Jackie,
this,
I'm
I'm going
trying
to
to get
start
the
sharing my
stage
screen. Maybe I'll
password.
just let me know
Yes,
if
of
you
course.
cannot see
Let me
my
just
screen.
drop you a message because it's password protected.
Sure, thanks.
Sorry about that.
And okay. So I haven't heard any complaints, so I'll probably just continue to carry on and give you a little bit of a presentation. So
Okay.
the main 2 points that I'm going to
Brendan,
focus
you.
on is securing funding and networking tips, and then I'll just give you a little rundown again about Archaea platform. Why would you want to use it? The type of features that it has, and maybe that why would you actually consider to maybe start working a little bit with our platform, maybe ahead before actually integrate or deploy to production.
Awesome. Made it to the stage.
Hey.
Hey. I guess I'll do a screen share now.
Would you like to do it first?
Yeah, and then
Okay.
you can take over.
Sounds good. You can go for
Let's
it.
figure that out.
I'll present right off. Thank you.
All right, let me try that again. Nope. Sorry, I'm still trying to share screen. All right, can you see my screen?
Not yet on my end. I'm not sure.
Sorry, this is my first time presenting in this platform.
No worries. Okay. Brendan, how about we troubleshoot while Daniel starts first?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. Maybe that will give you time to troubleshoot. No problem. I'm happy to just kind of carry on. So I'm going to start with security funding. And actually a lot of this stuff as well. I'm trying not to be too formal about it. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about also my experience, things that worked, things that didn't work, and a little bit about my journey. So maybe that's also a platform for people to maybe not commit the same mistakes that I did in some ways. I feel I have been lucky with Archaea. I've had really great people with a lot of experience helping me out on the back. So it's been definitely an easy ride. But I guess we'll talk about this part, securing funding, how to get people to hop on your dream. And for this, we're going to go for a few key points about pitch deck strategies. And I'm just going to go through a few things that for me, I believe they're important. And then it's also hopefully a value for you guys. I think one thing for the pitch deck is vision and value proposition first. Sometimes we get so entangled into our own project and dream that sometimes we just, we forget to take a step back and understanding, trying to explain, articulate to people, what are you trying to solve, right? Maybe people don't know much about the technology, about the terms that you're using, even vocabulary. If sometimes you're thinking about Web3, but maybe, even a lot of stuff here, we just kind of get used to using this lingo. And do always keep in mind about understanding, make sure your audience looks at you and says, okay, oh, I get it. Like you're trying to solve this. And then you can kind of trickle down into details. So until you get that, everything just might become a little bit more opaque later down. So I think it's one of the parts that's really interesting.
Sorry. I'll need you to be at the podium.
Sorry.
I'll need you to be at the podium because yeah, because
you want me to leave the podium or
no, be at the podium. Be at the podium over here.
Okay, got it. And so like literally physically, like an RPG. Cool. All right, I'll continue. So let me just again share my screen. Slideshow. Do let me know if you cannot see my screen. I'll just continue. So one thing about vision and value is also very important. Make your audience understand you've done proper market research and there's a real demand for the problem. And that's just something you receive positive feedback from a few friends. I cannot stress this enough. I think it's really important to make sure if you have competitors in the space, that's actually a good thing. That means there's demand for the market. Make sure you do somewhat of a performs out there online research and making sure that you're actually filling a gap that makes sense from an economical point of view and the economics make sense. I can think about a few things sometimes when you're younger or at one point you have a few friends and you think like, oh my God, this is such a great idea because you live in this micro cluster system or this cluster environment or ecosystem where you believe like everyone believes it's a great idea. But then you have to get off your comfort zone beyond your friends, beyond people that you know, beyond people that maybe want the best for you and say good things to kind of keep you positive. And then you got to really take it out and see what other people that have no relationship with you think. And that makes it a lot easier through online research or marketing and other types of tools. So I can talk about just two experiences that I remember. One was, so I live in APAC, Hong Kong, and one of our friends, he tried to get a little startup about a jacket that to detect impact because he was basically doing martial arts, and there was a specific martial art that they do here that was really useful. And at that time, it was just basically only people that did that martial art, and then actually people that are willing to actually buy that type of jacket, which resulted into a market segment that's almost non-existent. So he is such a big fan of it that he never took a step back and say this is just not doable. Like there's no market economics here. Also, another one was modern women. That I remember there was a research where the projections were just over the chart. And there was projections about really reaching out to a whole set of market segment in a lot of countries, including third world countries. And there wasn't like an assessment that a lot of the platform was through a credit card. So actually a lot of people that actually could, that was focused on the female audience, and then you could actually get a credit card. You could actually access those type of funds. It was a complete 180 degrees in terms of how many people you could actually reach. And that's just a few things. So feel free to take the punches early and understand that, you make sure your market is there. I think another one, just keep it short. I think people now, especially more now in our days of infinite scrolling, Instagram, TikTok, and all of that, like you don't have that much patience for keeping focus for half an hour, 40 minutes. I know probably there's a lot of stuff that you want to share about your product, but leave space for QA, drift to hear people's concerns, try to read the audience. Pitch that goes long and loses focus. When you see people drifting, start looking at their phones, you lost them. So don't try to go too much into details. I would say 8 minutes for a pitch or below is better, from my personal experience. The quicker you get to the problem, the quicker you make people understand what they're solving. About different, their little details, people are just not going to be probably really focus on hearing all the gritty details unless there's a few special people. So I think that's something to keep in mind. Another thing that sometimes it's kind of a mental exercise we have to do with ourselves is that our product is not special, or meaning your product in that sense. So ideas do come more often than we think. Sometimes we think we have a great idea, and sometimes it is true, but till execution, deployment, proven market growth rate, these are really the hard milestones to reach, and making sure you don't have unrealistic expectations. that you're just going to put your product out there in a website and you haven't really reached out to your client, you haven't really done the pitch, you haven't felt what the market is saying, and take that constructive criticism and then change it again and hear that your product maybe is not as good as you might think. And that is the reality, right? There's no like, my product is perfect, I'm going to launch it, and now people are just going to come to this application website and be dazzled, and it's not going to happen. And the lean approach of the startup, right, and being able to like get your MVP out there, start hearing the pros and cons, get some really honest feedback, and just continue to iterate. So because it's not really about the product, it's about your team, and it's about you and your ability to take that constructive criticism and keep moving forward. So I think here, like, an ability to self-criticize and learn from your mistakes, I believe of being of great value, right? Know your audience. So one thing that I feel for your pitch, a bit time consuming, but I think adjusting, calibrating details for your audience can make a key difference. Why do I say that as well? Like, for example, if you go to an angel investor, if you're, aiming to get a specific type of initial round of funding, maybe, it's not going to be so much about your product, but maybe about yourself, maybe about your team, what kind of experience you have, your ability to adapt. Are you going to really go through the, run the whole mile? Are you just a person that just likes that kind of buzz and hit and nice feeling about when you get a new product, everything is cool, but then when things start getting hard, the carousel is going up and then it's going down because it's going to have a lot of ups and downs. Are you willing to take the hits and keep moving, right? And I think a lot of people at the initial funding are going to look for that. If you go somewhere more advanced like VCs and venture capitalists, it's going to be a much more straightforward approach, in the meaning they will look for metrics, growth forecasts, last quarters. Are you growing? Are you getting more clients? Are you getting more money? How good is your team? And it's all going to be a lot more numbers, and they're only going to get in if the numbers really make sense, and they're going to drill in very deep, and they're used to this, so they can see the gaps. So make sure that whatever pitch decks you're going for, make sure you adapt towards that kind of perspective of the audience and the client. I think it's really important, at least for me as well, like if I would invest in a startup and everything, highlight your past experience, including if you fail. So failing is great. If you have a proven record, if you started a company and the fact that it didn't go well, that's perfectly normal. Like that is the mostly the standard, instead of actually going well. And maybe if it did go very well, you wouldn't be there to try to start something new, right? But knowing the caveats, knowing the roller coasters you're going to go through, knowing all these steps of how hard it is to get the right people, get the funding, get the everyday logistics and the wearing many hats. And if you know that and you can go for a second round or a third round, that's impressive. And that should be highlighted straight, very early on, I feel. So the fact you've been through similar experiences shows that you're ready for what's ahead, right? A boring part is financial. So I think it's, if people find more interest and they want to dig deeper, the fact that you've done the boring work of like forecast, expected expenses, how much, you probably have a forecast for your cloud services, for your team, hiring costs, marketing costs, what kind of runway do you have for the whole year, for your expectations, how much are you actually drifting from your initial budget? All these things are really important, and they're the boring part, right? They're not the sexy part, but it's really important to have, if it's an Excel sheet, if it's whatever you keep costs, but making sure those things are tracked, making sure you're keeping a hand on your budget and on your resources is really important. You might be that kind of person that's just very excited, very dynamic, very energetic. If you are that type of person that cannot deal with those details, you probably need someone to complement that part. So you need that person that stresses out about this kind of thing, that stresses out about the numbers, about the expenses, the forecasts. So it just depends the type of person you are. Some people can do everything. If you don't, if you are that other type of more energetic and kind of visionary, I would say my personal experience also is good to have someone that keeps your feet down to the earth and make sure you kind of can keep running for a while. that's the part of pitch deck. I'll open the QA a little bit for after the networking tips. So networking tips, how to connect, and more important, keep your connections. A few things. I'm personally a tech-driven person, so by definition, I'm not a very social-driven person. It's not usually my environment. I do like being more in front of the computer. So one thing that I did notice in the events that I did go, great networking is after events. So sometimes you have a great place, a great demo, some interesting people putting pitches and stuff, and then once it's ended, like that's actually the beginning of you just to kind of make sure you stay, make sure even if you feel uncomfortable, you're not seeing anyone. I personally sometimes feel like it's interesting going alone. So you're just going to have to talk to someone eventually instead of standing there, right? Or someone will just talk to you. Maybe they'll just feel sorry and go talk to you. So do put yourself into that uncomfortable zone. I think if you're a tech perspective, an engineer maybe is not as simple, at least for my personal kind of profile as well. But it is very essential just to kind of make sure if there's an event, try to really go the long way. And if it ends at 8 p.m., try to see if you stay a few hours, have a few drinks, or if you don't drink, like just try to talk to people, and that's where you really make the good connections. When you make the connection to that people, help them solve their problems. And sometimes you see, it's very common, like you only reach out to a person or to a client when you actually need something from them. They would really appreciate if you don't forget the small things, or just these little issues or problems, or they ask you for something and you actually remember and go back to them, being later, being a week, being 2 weeks, and you actually solve that problem. Really makes a good impression. And people really appreciate it, even if it's a small thing and you have a lot of stuff in your backlog, but then you kind of sorted that out, even if it's after 2 weeks, and you come back with a message like, wow, it just shows the type of character that you have, the profile. And I think people really appreciate that. Another thing is just also in networking, be honest about your product, where you stand. Sometimes people tend to always have this pitch, just everything is great, like amazing, and we're growing, and it can get a bit repetitive sometimes because everyone has, I think, a very flamboyant story about their startup. But to be honest, like on the back, it's always, it can get a bit messy. It can get a bit problematic. So sometimes if you're honest, that means people also will appreciate that, your confidence in knowing where you stand and where you need to go and grow. And I think that has more value. Successful startups as well. Like, a few people like Hashback, Hashport, Penguin also, like in terms of actually also extending to the Adara protocol. So there's been a lot of really interesting products coming out. Blade Wallet. I do have these are on the right, a few clients that we support. So actually we do support Hashport, also connected with the EVM World App Radar, Penguin, Hashback. So these are just an example of, really interesting platforms and startups that made it. And they're growing. They have a very successful base of users. And it just goes to show that, it's if you have a good team, if you keep your head, high and keep going, like you can really have a very successful product. Archaea's part, how was funding secure? That was a joint venture between BCW Ventures and THF, the Adara Foundation. So Archaea did have a lot of support from the BCW umbrella, and kind of providing the framework and structure to help us going through. And that's really of key value, because there's just resources that we didn't have to get so much, and we could connect and kind of plug in. And then, little by little, just kind of build our own ecosystem. But that really got us up to speed as well, making connections with the right people, and just have, a company that has experience in these things and knows where you're going to have your pitfalls. We understood there was an unmet need in the ecosystem. So the fact that you needed a private mirror node provider, because you did have public services, but obviously when the volume and transactions start increasing, then that's when, like other protocols, and obviously Infura, Alchemy, QuickNode, these are all examples of, very logical solutions. So Archaea just made sense as being the provider for the Adara protocol, and that gap needed to be filled. I think just two things before I kind of finished. Proven record of ability to execute the idea from ground up. So that's one thing that I think, because we're already part of that type of the BCW Ventures, they have, the ability to say, yes, we will make this happen. We will put this out. We already done this. So you do know that, your investment is in good hands, and we will have a product out there and serving clients. And show up, make sure, like, if there's sometimes these meetings can take long. Sometimes funding is a draining process. You think you can almost get it, but then there's another thing. You might get 3, 4, 5 meetings. And you just need to kind of, every meeting that you go for, like, it just shows that you have that ability to withstand and commitment and compromise to your and commitment to your product. All right, so I'm gonna stop here a little bit before I do my demo. Just wanted to see if you guys have any questions about these parts before I kind of come in with a little demo about our product. Alrighty then, I will share then my screen again and just give you a little rundown about our product. So I think there was already like a bit of more of a technical dive into Archaea. So I'll just go like, a little bit into why coming in and scaling with Archaea plus demo, right? Private mirror node provider. Do you actually need one? I want to just basically highlight, you do have public services, which is great. But we do have free accounts. So there's a pool of accounts that offers a similar performance to what you would get from a public service. And we offer twice the results per REST API call. So if you're interacting with a mirror node, you're trying to get all that data and connect to a service. Think about, we're basically already providing more than what you get from a free account. And there's no big justification for why you don't want to leverage that. If you do want to spin off your own mirror node, you can also do it. Just make sure, like, is it what you need, right? Because is it what you want? Because you're going to have infrastructure costs, you're going to have maintenance, you're going to have upgrades, you're going to have an infra team there. So there's going to be an extra cost on that versus maybe saying, I need X amount of calls. This is what I need. And then you can use, a model like us, infrastructure as a service, and just pay for what you need. Running these things can be somewhat expensive, so that's why it just makes sense to sometimes leverage this or outsource this to a company like Archaea. We do have a few dev developer tools, APIs, free boilerplate and code samples that integrate very well with our APIs and even with the Hashgraph SDK. A lot of contract-based, token-based, so this can get you up to speed. And just think about that part. Like, you may have a great application. All of a sudden, you actually start getting momentum. All that work is starting to pay off. And then all of a sudden, maybe you do a marketing campaign, maybe you just, you become viral. Maybe there's just something that happened that makes you get a lot of volume. And all of a sudden, your application cannot withstand the volume and the traffic. And then months of work can go to waste, right? And if you keep, for example, a free account with us, and if you're just trying to interesting and developing an application with Adera, flipping to a paid dedicated bandwidth is very quick. And also, we make our integration exactly like the public services. So if you do choose to use the bread and butter APIs, that can be as simple as adding a little API key just for you to get into our infra and changing the URL. So, nothing complicated. It's all very straightforward. And, we're here to help and grow the ecosystem. So let's just go for a little demo. So just to get you guys up to speed, this is the main website. You can see some case studies, features, developers, and just an overall kind of our different tiers. You can actually get a sign in here. So if you do sign in, you can create an account. You just need an email. That's it. And you're ready to go. You have free pool of accounts. And then you can also come into Starter by payment gateway. And then if you do want to have that kind of request, you just have a little chat. We can have a meeting. We'll have a very bespoke kind of conversation, understand what kind of tier you need. Once you get into the dashboard, this is a little bit of an overview about how to plug it into our infra. So we do have, real-time always polling into our mirror nodes, make sure they're all healthy. This is my monthly usage, and the projects are really what gets you going into our API. So you just create a project. You see there's a network for Adera. Being mainnet, being testnet, it does not matter. You can literally just go into your project. You'll have your API key. that allows you to go into your into our infrastructure. I'll show you a code sample very quickly. And we have a very long suite of APIs. So we have REST API. We're still coming out with a very initial version of GraphQL. We have our in-house API called Watchtower, which has streaming push for, at the moment, topics and account balances, and we're extending it to more. Very easy to integrate with sockets. The JSON RPC, which is still beta, but allows you to interact with EVM contracts and through also Web3 EVM-based tools. Very key for people that are already used to the EVM world. We also have good experience with that if you need like a few code samples or walk through about how to leverage that for Adera and the gRPC endpoint. Very comprehensive statistics. So basically at this point, we do offer timelines from the beginning all the way to the last 24 hours. So if you just want to see what people are using, how's your request, all the way to not only the API level, but the method level. So you can even understand what are people calling, right? Contracts, accounts. So we just made sure that everything is as granular as you may need, and that can give you more educated insights about things that are being used. Workbench is something that came to fulfill a little bit about our difficulty in navigating the data sets of the mirror node. There is Swagger docs, not always maybe like the most, user-friendly UX. Sometimes we felt like there could be something that we could do to improve. So you can use Workbench completely for free. And what it does is just allows you to navigate a little bit about the data sets of the REST APIs. So for example, if I want to get the accounts, I send a request, right? That just comes in, and I understand exactly the data sets that I'm familiar with. I can copy, but best of all is actually you can get code samples of integration. So if you do need to get that in, Node.js, Python, just JavaScript, curl, that's all available here. So you can just here literally copy paste, and you're ready to go. So you can understand very quickly how the integration works. You can see here. Actually, the URL, very simple to actually get it started. It already shows you the URL. It shows your XAPI key, and that's just very easy to integrate. So we make it like the public node. You only need to have the header and the XAPI key. If you do have concerns about compromising your API key, it can also be regenerated at any time, just to let you know. I think I'm almost done. Just want you to know we do have 24/7 support. If you do have any problems, especially if you have in the big tiers, you have a big launch, let us know. We are covering all time zones. So if there's any issue or if we need to be more alert about any big spikes, any big demand of requests, making sure our autoscale is working and you get all the bandwidth you need, we're here to help. And just to let you know, we have autoscale, which means if you do go above the millions of requests you wanted, no problem. We'll let you run, and then we can just work out the logistics and the over usage fees. We do have teams. That means you can add other people to your account and work together in the same project. Different types of permissions as well, from admin to regular users. Notifications if your account is running out, and just a little information about our tiers, right? So you can always contact us and we get back to you. That is all in a nutshell about where we are. We are moving forward with other things like real-time notifications, more effort on GraphQL, understanding a little bit, contract management, maybe contract tools that actually help people more to interact with smart contracts on Adera. So we'll keep you posted, obviously. And I think that's all I wanted to share for this meeting. I'll open the floor if you guys have any questions or any other type of comments. Okay, so hopefully, if you do know how to go to the website, create an account, please do. Tell us constructive criticism, good things and bad things, especially the bad things. Please go for it. We definitely want to make sure how to continue to improve our platform. I think that's it. I'll leave you. I'll probably let now Brandon just kind of take the lead and just carry on.
Thanks, Daniel. So, okay. So I'd like to invite Brendan to come on stage as he continues the session. Uh-oh, where's Brendan? Brendan, you there? folks give us a second as Brendan joins us. So, folks, please send any questions that you might have in the chat box.
Yeah, absolutely. Also open for questions, even if it's not about Archaea, about my experience with the Data protocol or anything that I may help.
So you mentioned that this Archaea was a joint venture between THF and BCW Ventures, right? Like how did it get started? Like how do you guys get started on your journey?
Exactly. I think in that sense, we were in a bit of a, I guess, semi-privileged position in the sense that BCW already worked previously with THF and delivered Hashboard. So the decentralized bridging functionality for Hedera. And from there on, the connections were somewhat already built. And because there was a good track record, that's when the proposal for this service, because actually at that time, what happened is even Hashboard, they were having a few problems in terms of responsiveness and latency for accessing the public mirror node. That's when kind of start brewing the idea that, okay, we probably need a private mirror node. And then, okay, if we're going to do a private mirror node, why not, help the community actually not make it only for ourselves, but actually a platform and a private mirror node provided the service for the whole Hedera ecosystem. And that's how it kind of came to be. And then it's a conjunction of obviously applying for the grant with THF and a set of meetings that try to validate not only the product at the beginning stage, but then as you develop, also making sure you show the functionality coming to life before it's released. So that's also that part, the ability to execute. So I think in that sense, if you do have someone that obviously or past experience that you can leverage, that was really key for us. If not, fortunately, like we live in today in the world where we're beyond the reach of just an email or beyond the reach of just a face-to-face. There's always ecosystem channels, both on Slack, both on Discord, that can be reached out and just kind of putting your idea out there, obviously.
Okay. Thank you for that. Okay. So, hello, Brendan.
Hey.
Hey, Brendan.
Yeah. Okay. So,
all right, you can see me.
Yeah.
All right. Let me just get off the podium, and I will leave you to it. Thank you, Brendan.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to say, like, while Daniel's still here, that we had an event earlier on in the year with, I believe, the same series. It was the Stack Up Learning thing. And, like, basically our public node was unable to cope with the volume of requests from all the participants. I think we had several hundred all trying to do the same thing at the same time. And yeah, that's because of rate limiting, right? So, Archaea stepped in and basically saved the day, saying, "Hey, we have this huge capacity. Just need to basically turn the switch on, and all good to go." So that's pretty awesome. The other thing I wanted to say is the workbench thing. I'm pretty excited to see GraphQL coming in. That will be like a very, very fun way to explore data and make custom APIs in a way that isn't quite easy to do in pretty much any other network. I've seen some attempts at it, but if there is a GraphQL endpoint that has the power of Archaea behind it, that would be excellent.
Absolutely, yeah. I think going back to that point, Brendan, I think we've seen a lot of demand from GraphQL. There's definitely people that are interested, like saying, okay, this will actually solve a lot of problems for overfetching, underfetching, even GraphQL subscriptions, so dynamic pushes. So we're super interested in being a positive force and bringing that up. So at the moment, we do hope as well, in the foreseeable future, will be one of the main hopefully positive forces in bringing more and more GraphQL implementation to the Mirror node. So fingers crossed. And thank you for the workbench. It's kind of an internal idea, but it's super cool to hear that actually people look at it and say, okay, actually, this seems like a good idea. And I think in the future, you will see it more, if everything goes well, as a public tool and with more support for APIs. So you guys hopefully will be able to use it to just work more easily with the data sets in the Mirror node.
Yeah, 100%. Like you see tools similar to Workbench a lot in Web 2 space, but in Web 3, it's a bit hard to find.
Yeah. And I would hopefully would love as well to make some contract integration. So maybe you can even deploy contracts through it. You can even call methods through it, plug in your wallet. So hopefully, happy that we see interest. So we're just going to push it as well and make sure more and more people can use it, regardless if they have an Archive account or not. Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot. By the way, I'm also always available at daniel@archive.io. So if you do guys have any questions, if you have anything that you just want to chat, also open, happy to reply. And I'll leave the floor to you, Brandon. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Yeah. All right. So I'm having a bit of technical difficulty. So Jackie, if you want to do the screen share now, that'd be great.
Yeah. You want to try one more time?
I just did.
Oh, you just did? Okay. Then I'll just do it. All right. Which slide would you like me to start at?
Right at the top, the first slide. Yeah. Sorry, everyone. For those who missed the first few minutes, we're doing it topsy-turvy. All right, let's go to the first slide. Next slide. All right, so here's a bit of my bio. Let's just go through that quickly. Next one, and it's Daniel's. You just heard from him. It's a bit funny going the other way around. And all right, so this is what we'll cover in the workshop. So you've already heard about securing funding from Daniel, as well as scaling on Hedera with Archaea. So that's great. And a couple of areas that I'll be touching on are the key metrics and the product roadmap. So very high level overview, right? Now, let's ask, what are the evaluation criteria? Basically, you've got to think about what are the evaluation criteria for the hackathon, and you have to do that. You check the hackathon rules and the description pages, and if you're not sure about anything, the best thing to do is to clarify with the hackathon organizers. I know that this sounds like a very basic thing to say, but it's also like a very common thing that we don't see participants doing. There's plenty of opportunities, and definitely in this hackathon, we've got mentor hours, we've got just hangout sessions. We've also got the Discord where you can ask questions, and of course that's only the stuff specific to this hackathon. You've still got the more wide or general support available. Like you can ask questions on Stack Overflow, for example. As long as you tag it with Hedera, you will, one of us will take a look at it and try to answer your questions. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share 4 tips and 2 common pitfalls when among hackathon teams and submissions that I see happen quite a lot. So with this in mind, hopefully your hackathon submissions will avoid pitfalls and do well because of the tips. All right, let's go to the next one. All right, so the first tip is to pay attention to the submission requirements, right? So 3 things, right? First of all, what are the artifacts that are required? So again, this is defined in the hackathon itself. So usually that's like some combination of a GitHub repo, a slide deck, a screen recording of the product demonstration, or an in-person pitch. Sometimes it's not an in-person pitch, sometimes it's a video pitch. It depends on each particular hackathon. Moving on, we've got tech usage requirements. So what the default requirement is that the company that is sponsoring the prizes, right, you must use their technology. That's kind of obvious, but we do get submissions every now and then where it doesn't really use the technology or completely misses the point. And those kinds of projects, it's usually get disqualified in the very first round of judging, right? Sometimes a hackathon is sponsored by multiple sponsors, right? That's not the case necessarily in all hackathons, but if that is the case, you should pay attention to what the different prizes are and what the different requirements for the different prizes are. So some of them will have a basic technology usage requirement, like saying, for example, you must deploy a smart contract on this particular network, right? And some of them will be more specific. They'll say, okay, you need to use this specific API, or you need to do this particular thing. And sometimes you can even figure out whether you can stack categories, if you will. So for example, you can build a project that is potentially in the running for prize number 1 as well as prize number 2, because you have met the requirements for both of them. That's not necessarily something you should aim for, but it's something worth considering, right? If there is a multi-category scenario. And the next thing is the theme or use case requirements, right? So usually the theme is set at a hackathon level, and the best thing to do in this for this is to look into who the sponsors are, who the mentors are, who the judges are, and what are their connections to the theme. Like if there are any, try to discover them. So one thing I'll point out here is that this is really a spectrum, thematic fit. It's not a Boolean like yes, it's a fit, or no, it's not a fit. So it can go all the way through from, yeah, it sort of checks the box, right? All the way through to hell yes, this is exactly a fit for the theme. Now, you don't have to be, right at the end of like the hell yes kind of thing, but it pays to be aware of where on that spectrum you are, right? In terms of whether you fit the use case requirements or the theme. All right, let's go on to the next one. Right. So the next thing is, again, something that is kind of obvious, should be common sense, but it is a common pitfall, right? I think I mentioned this earlier, right? Some of the anti-patterns that we see as hackathon judges quite often is that sometimes there is no code repository, right? Or there is a code repository that's been submitted, but it's missing large parts of it. For example, right, you can see a Web3 project that's been submitted. Maybe it has smart contracts, but it's missing a DApp, right? But then in the pitch or in the demo, it's obvious that there should be both. So, please, kind of submit everything that you've actually developed or anything that you claim to have developed in your pitch. The other thing as well that I've noticed, which is kind of similar strain to this, is that sometimes you have multiple branches or multiple repos depending on who worked on it. So maybe there is the smart contracts person, and then there is the DApp development person, and they work in 2 separate repos, right? And then you only submit one. Or they work in the same Git repo, but then they work on 2 different branches. But then, in the submission, you only have one. The best thing to do is, if you have 2 separate repos, try to merge them. Or if for some technical reason that's not possible, submit both repos, right? If you have 2 separate branches for different aspects of the repo, the best thing to do is to actually merge them into a single branch, right? You kind of want to make it easier for the reviewer to actually perform their review. Another common pitfall of skipping submission requirements is kind of like another pattern is basically the pitch only kind of submission, right? So this is where the participating team kind of just ignores all the submission requirements entirely, and just basically it's a PowerPoint presentation, slide deck kind of thing, or a video pitch, and that's it, nothing else, right? So be clear that a hackathon isn't the same thing as an ideathon, right? It's not about just coming up with ideas. You also have to implement something in some form, and that's all stated in the requirements. Now, if something actually is an ideathon, then that's fine, right? But when it's a hackathon, you have to submit a project that has some implementation contained inside of it. All right, let's go to the next slide. Right, using specified technology, right? So this is something that judges will explicitly look out for when they're reviewing submissions, right? And the key thing here, this is the tip, is to make it easy for them, right? So in a Git repo, for example, right, there's typically a README file in the root folder, right? And that should contain all the usual things that the README file contains, right? Describing the project, how to use it, how to install it, etc., right? Now, one additional thing that I think would be beneficial or makes it easy for judges to evaluate a particular project in the context of a hackathon, right, is to have a section in the README to say, hey, here are where are all the key things that I've done that I want you to review, right? And then just have a list of bullet points with links to specific areas in the code. So, for example, you can say, this is where I have my logic where I am connecting to Hedera network, for example. Okay, then you point to that particular file, or this is my this is the logic where I did this specific sustainability implementation that's required by the theme, right? And then you link to that particular thing. So the idea is when a judge sees the README file, right, they can see that section and they click on the links and they jump immediately into or directly into the parts which they want to review anyway, right? So you're making their job easier. If you don't do that, right, the judges, what they have to do is they have to like scan through the code, and search through the code sometimes to figure out what you're actually doing, right? So it's kind of easier. It kind of is faster if there is like a bit of a directory to just like sort of skip that step, right? And judges do appreciate it, right, when it's easier or quicker to find what they're after. So that's a tip. All right, let's move on to the next one, right? So fitting a specified theme. So most challenges in hackathons do have requirements for a thematic fit, right? So it's not just about matching the technology requirements. So that's only one part of this fit, right? So the other part is to match the theme. So let's say in this hackathon, right, one of the thematic fits is sustainability. So you can go for that, or use case fit, right? And then the technology is Hedera. So you have to use Hedera's technology, right? But let's say you use Hedera technology and you build on a use case that is not one of the thematic requirements, or not one of the use cases. So it doesn't really fall into any of the categories. So that kind of submission won't do so well in comparison to those who use both the technology as well as match the theme or the use cases, right? So for example, right, if you want to go for a sustainability theme because that's one of the use cases that was asked for, right? So in that case, right, don't just build a decentralized exchange, right? And it's just a standard decentralized exchange. So instead, right, if you do want to build a decentralized exchange, a DEX, right, build one that has incorporated some sort of sustainability component into it, and then that way you have matched the theme, right? And that's an important thing to think about when you're in the planning stages of the project, right? Now, the other thing is like where or how important this thematic fit or the use case fit is within the project, right? The best scenario is when that use case that you're going for is front and center for the project, right? So it's the most important thing or one of the most important things in the project, right? If it's not, if it's sort of like slapped on at the end, that is pretty obvious as well to the judges. They can tell that, oh, okay, you just took a DEX and then you tweaked some small minor component of it, and if that's all you did, then okay, it's sort of like, okay, you check the box, but it's not like on the other end of the spectrum where it's like, wow, this is awesome, right? This is a really good fit. So you want to kind of go for the wow, this is really awesome end of the spectrum for thematic fit. All right, let's move on to the next one, right? Which is a pitfall, which I see unfortunately quite often, which is resubmissions from of projects that are existing projects that are well known, or even resubmissions from other hackathons, right? For some reason, there is a opinion maybe that this is easy, this is difficult to spot, but actually it's quite easy, right? Because code is pretty similar, and it's pretty exact. So if you copy paste something, it's pretty easy to spot by the judges, right? So I'll clarify that some hackathons do allow this, some hackathons do not allow this. So it's always best to clarify, check with the rules if this is even allowed at all, check with your mentors, etc. Right? So if it is allowed, right, discuss with your mentors within the hackathon whether like what the specifics are. Do you need to make significant changes to make it resubmission worthy, for example, or is that completely not allowed at all? Etc. Right? So even when a hackathon technically does allow in its rules resubmissions, judges are much more favorable towards original submissions, right? If they know that something's been copied from somewhere else and that's one of the projects, and then another project is like, okay, this is a novel idea, this is a new thing, right? The new thing obviously will score better, right? Because because it's more original, and that might be one of the requirements in the judging criteria, right? So the only counter to that, right, is to make significant changes. So if you are going to resubmit something or do something that you worked on before, right, make some significant changes, or make some, make it a new thing entirely based on the baseline. All right, let's move on to another tip, right? This is to do with code quality. And basically to pay attention to it. Now, in a hackathon where it's sort of what I call a weekend mad rush, right? So basically you start on Friday night and you don't sleep for Friday night and Saturday night, and you have to submit on Sunday, right? There are a lot of hackathons that fall into that category. And in those cases, right, the thing that you implement will be completely bare bones, right? No fancy things, just what's the bare minimum to get the thing to work, right? But in this particular hackathon, and in many others, right, you have a decent amount of time, you actually get to sleep, etc., right? So in this scenario, right, it's actually a good idea to pay attention to code quality, right? So you can score bonus points with technical judges, right? Even though these things are, strictly speaking, nice to have in the context of a hackathon. So do all the proper software engineering things like tests, static analysis, code coverage, linting, even documentation for users and developers, right? And that is kind of sort of a general sentiment, and my specific tip on how to do this properly, right, or how to do this more feasibly, right, in the context of a hackathon, is that there are plenty of starter projects that are out there, right, for the specific technology that you're going to be working with, right? So you can use these starter projects to figure out how to do this, or I should say, to avoid having to figure out how to do this during a hackathon, where you want to focus on building your use case or focus on integrating the technology. So the starter project already has the setup for test and code coverage and all of that, right? That makes it super easy because you don't have to think about that during the hackathon, right? But if you do create a project from scratch without using a starter project, then you do have to wind up figuring out how to do this, and chances are you will probably not focus that much on it. So yeah, that's the tip. All right, let's move on to the next one, right? So here's a very important question to ask yourself, right? Before you start building your project, actually, right? So there's a throwback to, I'll do a throwback to Matt's presentation. Matt Woodward gave a presentation as part of this hackathon series as well. And one of the things was I would say the main takeaway was to validate your idea or your concept before you even start building, right? So here's sort of a corollary to that, right? So what does your team want to do with the project that you build, right, during the hackathon, after the hackathon? In other words, once the hackathon is finished, let's say you win a prize, let's say you don't, right? That project that you have, right, this sort of artifact, this intellectual property, what will your team do with it, right? Do you intend to build it anyway, right? Regardless of of the hackathon? So even if there wasn't a hackathon, will you still continue, right? Will you make the same technology choices, right, that you're planning on at the start, right? Will you make the same product feature choices? What are the next iterations, right? So when you ask yourself like this set of questions before you commit to the project at the beginning of the project, right, you can use this your own answers to these questions, right, to create your own product roadmap, which is something that we'll see in the next section, right? You can use this to determine if your idea is even good to begin with, so it's like the sort of self-validating almost. And you can also use this to determine if you need to go back to the drawing board and come up with a new idea, right? So having said that, right, I'm going to like sort of directly contradict myself with a counterpoint almost, right? So this is like something that you have to weigh the pros and cons, right? Do not think like overanalyze this, right? So this kind of can lead to analysis paralysis, right? So do not dwell on this for too long, and do not use this to procrastinate in a hackathon, right? Especially in a hackathon, right? Be snappy about this. So quickly answer those questions. If you need to go back to the drawing board and plan a new idea, great, do it, but be snappy, right? Be decisive, move on, right? I'll bring up like the Pareto principle, right, which is 80 for 20, right? You need to sort of like have a do the part that gives you the most benefit, right, for the least effort, and focus on that when it comes to asking these questions and potentially going back to the drawing board and brainstorming a new idea, right? Because in a hackathon, as with any project, execution is more important than ideation, right? And obviously in hackathons, this is even more important because of the time constraint, right? All right, so that's it, right? We'll move on to the product roadmap. I just want to check if there are any questions in the chat. Let me check. Yes, I see a comment from Jackie saying that we screen for repeat projects on our side, and yeah, we'll tell teams I'll notify teams. Okay, yes, that's great. Awesome. All right, so if I don't have any more questions, I'll move on to the product roadmap section of this. All right, so what is the purpose of a roadmap, right? So I think this is something that is worth discussing, right? What really is the purpose? And you should think about it in the context of two different like components or angles, right? And both are important, right? So one is, think about the project that you're building, right, as a tech project, a technology project, right? And the other thing to think about is that it is a user product as well, right? So what you're building in the hackathon is simultaneously a technology project as well as being a user product, right? And you need to consider the audience, right, when you're thinking about a roadmap, right? So there is going to be a component of the roadmap where the angle of it is focused on the technology of the project, and there is going to be an angle of the product roadmap that is considering the angle of the user product, and you have to consider both, right? And there is a third one as well, which is investors, and I think that this is something that you can sort of not think so. You don't need to think so much about it, at least at the beginning of the hackathon. That's maybe something that you consider more towards the end of it, or perhaps even after the hackathon is over. All right, let's move on to milestones. Right. So what is a milestone, right? It's a group of product features and significant events, right? And you take all of them together, that's a single milestone, right? And these milestones are often tied to specific versions or releases or launches, etc., that sort of thing, right? In a product roadmap, you typically see both past milestones as well as planned milestones, i.e. things that you anticipate that you'll deliver in the future. And a product roadmap is often depicted visually in a timeline format. So you'll see like maybe a horizontal line, milestone, 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 or even a vertical timeline, milestone, 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 right? So that's kind of how you want to visualize it, and maybe you'll have a web page or maybe even a README file. You can put in some sort of timeline with milestones on it, right? Now, that kind of describes a product roadmap in a general sense, right? But it is going to be different in a hackathon versus, you know, a real development, which I'll just sort of think of as do not need to commit to any specific delivery dates, right? You can just skip dates entirely. It doesn't make sense in the context of a hackathon, right? And usually you'll just have 2 milestones to 4 milestones in total, right? You don't need so many, just less than a handful, basically, right? And the audience for all your milestones, I would say, are your hackathon judges, right? So who is going to be looking at that? Hackathon judges. That's the most important thing, right? Now, contrast that with a real development or real product roadmap, right? So something that you can transition into post-hackathon with whatever you have built during your hackathon. Delivery dates, but with low granularity, for example, quarterly, right? And usually it's quite extensive. You might have many milestones in it. The audience is completely different. There's no more hackathon judges that are involved. Usually your audience are venture capital firms for investments, grant programs, incubators, et cetera, and then you also have another audience, which are your actual users and customers, right? So you have to think about these 2 audiences when you publish your product roadmap for a project that is past the hackathon stage and, you know, seeking to get real users, seeking to get real investment, right? And you also need to think about, unlike in a hackathon, right, you need to think about what you want to embellish, like what you want to boast about, versus what you want to avoid, right? And there's going to be like a natural tension that plays out. Like sort of presentation, like let's focus on what you need for a hackathon, right? So that's just like for bigger context. So no need to commit to specific delivery dates, just 2 to 4 milestones, and write it as if your target audience are hackathon judges. That's the main thing to take away from here, right? Moving on, let's go to features, right? So product features. So these are the features that your end users are going to interact with, right? So do they care about it? Are they going to start using it? And is that something that they have been asking for, right? And I won't go into a lot of detail here because this is something that you should discover during a product ideation or validation. A lot of details in one of the previous talks as part of the series. So, you know, there's a recorded replay of that. Please go and watch it. He does a much better job of it than the slide's going to do, right? Right. So main thing to do with product features is, when in the context of a product roadmap, is to state them in a very brief way, right? And the target is 1 sentence, right? Just 1 sentence, state what the product feature is. If you have, right, write them somewhere else and link to them. So, for example, on your product roadmap, you might have 1 sentence, and then at the end of it, you have a link, file, etc. Right? That's kind of what you do, right? Now, in a hackathon, right, you will have product features, right? But they won't be as extensive as it will in a post-hackathon, you know, actual product, right? So you need to think about this, right? And just approximate, right? Like summarize, think about what your product features are or should be or aspire to be, and use them when you're. Let's talk a little bit about post-hackathon, right? So remember how I said that you have a hackathon standard of roadmaps, and then you also have a production standard of roadmap, right? Now, at the end or after your hackathon, the tip is to convert from your existing hackathon standard 1 to a production standard 1, right? The key thing that changes is your target audience, right? So it goes from being hackathon judges to investors and end users. And so you might want to rewrite a product roadmap at this point in time, right? Now, The next thing is that your product features, as I just mentioned earlier on, within a hackathon, they're approximations, right? They're not fully detailed, right? Now, you have created these in a time crunch, so that's understandable, right? But you know, you can refine them. There's nothing wrong with refining them at the end of the hackathon. The other thing is that during a hackathon, quite often, everyone is like often guilty of wishful thinking. You know, you plan to build this, but you didn't get enough time. Everyone who has participated in hackathon knows that feeling, right? So there's a lot of wishful thinking, a lot of yeah. So because of that, you'll likely want to like refine that or delete it, or actually build it, etc., or push out the date, etc. Right? So you definitely need to refine the product features that are part of each milestone, and the milestones themselves. All right. And I think that's it, right? So this is cycling back to where Daniel started. Awesome. Do I have any questions? All right. No questions in the chat. All right. I don't know, Jackie, Daniel, you want to say anything?
Yeah, I mean, so we still have a bit of time, so maybe we can just head on down and hang out with the participants in case they have any questions. So we find that sometimes they prefer to have a face-to-face, well, virtual.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. I'll see you below the stage area.
Yep, let's do it. Let me.
Yep. Thank you, Brendan and Daniel. So, folks, yeah, it's kind of like Q&A session right now. Please head on and have a chat. Yep, with our speakers. Once again,
around.
If you want to have a chat with someone, move close to their characters. It's almost like a game, right? So, go for it.
Okay, we've got a question. Are the product milestones and features to be included in the README of the product files on GitHub? So I don't think that the hackathon has any requirements as to where you put it. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for attending, Jeremy. See you later. Okay, Ogolo. Just to answer your questions. So there is no specified place to put your product roadmap. You could put it inside a client side, like within your client app that you're building. If you wanted to, you could put it in your README, or anywhere else. Just as long as it's easy for the judges to, like, A, know that you do have a product roadmap, and B, if so, where can I find it?